Why living with less gives you more freedom. The science of simplicity. We live in an era of artificial abundance, a time when quantity has become more important than quality, where appearance is valued more than content, and where having has so brutally overtaken being that the simple idea of living with less sounds like poverty, failure, or giving up. It is such a profound reversal that many do not even realize that they have been conditioned to measure their own lives by accumulation rather than essence. However, history shows us something very different. All people who, at some point, have achieved a real level of freedom. Not the freedom sold by advertising, not the freedom staged on social media, but true freedom, the kind that does not depend on others to exist, have had to go through the inevitable process of simplification. This less is not absence, it is not scarcity, it is liberation. It is removing from your life everything that is not essential, that weighs more than it adds, that takes up physical and mental space without bringing any real return. It is the conscious act of cutting invisible chains that society has normalized, and that because they are so common, are no longer perceived. The truth is that modern civilization is like a huge market of illusions. We are educated to work more and more, to earn more, to buy more, to show more. And all this under the seductive promise that one day we will finally be happy. But that day never comes because happiness in this system is not a destination, it is a product. And like any product, it must always be out of our reach so that we continue to chase after it. We live trapped in a never-ending race, trading our time for goods that soon lose their luster. And when the luster fades, the system pushes us toward the next purchase, and then the next, until our existence becomes confused with the very act of consuming. This is exactly where the science of simplicity comes in. The deep understanding that by reducing what we own, we expand who we are. By cutting out excess, we make room for what really matters. By saying no to the superfluous, we are saying yes to life. This science is silent, almost invisible, because it is not based on showing external achievements, but on feeling internal achievements. It is the courage to let go, to give up what does not add value, to challenge the logic of excess that shapes the world. It is not about living less, but about living better. It is realizing that the essential has always been within reach, but was hidden under layers of things, commitments, and obligations that should never have taken up so much space. It is understanding that freedom is not having everything, but being able to choose what is really worth keeping, and having the strength to let the rest go. The paradox is clear. The more you accumulate, the more dependent you become. The more things you own, the more things own you. It is a silent slavery, disguised as achievement. Bigger houses mean more time cleaning, more bills to pay, more repairs to make. Each additional square meter brings with it hours of maintenance and more responsibility to sustain something that often serves more to impress than to live in. More expensive cars mean more expensive insurance, more fear of scratches, more attention to appearances, and less peace of mind when driving. Full closets mean wasted hours deciding what to wear, mental energy consumed with trivialities, and constant dissatisfaction that feeds on comparison with others. Accumulated debt means sleepless nights, arguments at home, constant anxiety, and the suffocating feeling that work is never enough to cover the hole opened by rampant consumption. The global economy depends on this cycle. It is no accident, it is a design. The system needs to keep you too busy to think, too indebted to rebel, and too insecure to break away. That is why consumption is sold as personal fulfillment and social status. It is a sophisticated prison with invisible walls, where the bars are made of objects and the chains are made of manufactured desires. There is no need for guards or locks. Just keep people chasing something they will never achieve. That way, they remain docile, predictable, and molded to feed the machine. Contrary to what we imagine, it is not the lack of goods that imprisons us, but their excess. When you have little, it is possible to move, change, start over. But when you have too much, every step requires effort. Every decision is weighed by the cost of maintaining what has been accumulated. It is the cruel logic of living to sustain what should serve us, of becoming a prisoner of one's own wealth. And ironically, many are proud of this prison, as if golden chains were less chains because they shine. The true science of simplicity is the act of reversing this relationship. You should own your things, not the other way around. And this is only possible when you deliberately decide to reduce, cut, sell, donate, discard, and free yourself. It is not an impulsive move, but a conscious process of identifying what really adds value to life and what is just there to take up space. It is understanding that each object requires time, care, attention, and energy, and that if the return does not outweigh the cost, it is just another anchor. Simplicity is not giving up for the sake of giving up, but making room for what is essential. It is regaining control over your own time, your own peace, your own life, because in the end, freedom was never about having more. It was always about needing less. Living with less is not an invitation to misery, but to clarity. It is consciously choosing what deserves to be in your life and what does not, without being guided by imposed standards or the gaze of others. It is like cleaning a dark room full of debris. At first, it is uncomfortable. You stumble over memories. You feel the weight of memories attached to objects. You face the challenge of detachment. But little by little, the air becomes lighter. Light begins to enter, and you realize that the space was not small. It was just suffocated by excess. And the moment the environment opens up, you understand that it was never the size that limited your freedom, but rather the disorder accumulated over time. The same logic applies to the mind. As long as you are saturated with unnecessary tasks, empty distractions, commitments that add nothing, and useless worries, there will be no mental space to create, to rest, to reflect, to truly live. The mind needs clarity to function at its full potential, but the system does not want you to live that way. A free mind questions, chooses, and decides for itself. And that is dangerous for a model of society that depends on constant consumption to sustain itself. That is why they want us to be overwhelmed, anxious, eternally busy, and always connected to stimuli that distance us from silence and introspection. Our calm mind does not buy as much, does not go into debt as much, does not compare itself as much, and above all, does not allow itself to be easily manipulated. Living with less, in this sense, is more than a lifestyle choice. It is an act of practical intelligence and also of political resistance. It is turning your back on the social script that tirelessly repeats that the value of a human being is measured by the size of their house, the brand of their car, the logo on their shirt, or the number of followers on social media. It is refusing to participate in this silent competition that turns neighbors into rivals and friends into comparisons. It is breaking with the narrative that conditions us to spend our lives trying to prove our worth through what we own. This decision requires courage, because it is easier to go with the flow and drown in it than to swim against the current. You have to accept that, by choosing to live with less, you will be misunderstood by some, criticized by others, and often seen as someone who gave up or didn't want it anymore. But the truth is that those who live with less live with more time, more presence, more freedom, more peace. It is having a life that does not need to impress anyone, because it is already sufficient in itself. And in the end, that is the only measure of success that really matters. The freedom that comes from this choice is not theoretical. It is physical, mental, and spiritual. Physical because you have less weight to carry, less maintenance to do, fewer commitments to uphold. Mental because your focus turns to what matters and you don't get lost in unnecessary noise. Spiritual because you stop placing your identity in perishable things and start building a sense of meaning that does not depend on external conditions. This triple liberation is impossible in accumulation. It only flourishes in reduction. And here comes a fundamental point. This choice is not natural for most people, because we have been conditioned since childhood to associate less with worse. From an early age, we are rewarded for wanting more. More toys, higher grades, more diplomas, more followers, more money. Simplicity is not taught. It is discovered, often the hard way, after years of chasing promises that were not fulfilled. But when this discovery happens, something changes forever. You realize that you no longer need to trade your time for objects that will lose their value in a few months. You realize that you don't need to impress strangers. You realize that it is possible to work less, spend less, worry less, and still live more, live better. It's almost an epiphany. Life doesn't have to be as complicated as society says it is. This realization, however, does not come without resistance. Friends, family, and colleagues will question, criticize, laugh, or even feel threatened by your choice. Because living with less exposes an uncomfortable truth that rushing, stress, and excessive consumption are not inevitable, but choices, and choices can be undone. The science of simplicity is not just about financial economy, but about life economy. Spending less energy on what doesn't matter so you have more energy for what does matter. And here's the key. Freedom is not doing everything you want. It's not being forced to do what you don't want. When you live with less, you buy that freedom. Less debt means more decision-making power. Less commitments means more time to rest or create. Less spending means more autonomy to say no to a job or a boss who doesn't respect you. And that's a form of power that can't be bought with a credit card, only earned through conscious choices. The modern world tries to sell freedom through things that imprison us. The dream car that requires 60 installments, the huge house that requires a 30-year mortgage, the unmissable trips that leave bills for the next 6 months. It's a grotesque irony. We work like prisoners to pay for the key to the cell, but the key is fake, and the door never opens. The only real way out is to reduce the size of the cell until it ceases to exist. When you understand this deeply, something incredible happens. Anxiety begins to give way to calm. Fear of loss gives way to inner security, and the feeling of always being late gives way to the peace of being exactly where you should be. The science of simplicity does not promise a life without problems, but it does guarantee a life with fewer invented problems. Because, let's be honest, much of our stress comes from things we didn't even need to have. When you take away those burdens, what remains is time, energy, and space to live in a more human, more present, more free way. Living with less is, in the end, living more consciously, more fully, more in control of yourself. And this is a science that anyone can learn, but few have the courage to practice, because it requires confronting the most convenient lie we've ever been told, that happiness is in the next purchase, when in fact, it was always in the space you never left empty enough for it to enter.